Have you ever wondered if saving a life could change the entire course of your destiny beyond all recognition and reason? Imagine standing alone in a winter storm so fierce that the wind itself seems to howl with the voices of ancient spirits long forgotten by time. The snow falls thick enough to bury entire villages beneath its merciless white blanket of frozen death and endless cold. Now picture yourself discovering 12 wolves huddled together in a cave, their bodies trembling with cold, their eyes pleading for mercy. You do not know that one among them wears an invisible crown of power that commands all the wild lands. You do not know that your kindness will bind your soul to his in ways no mortal woman has ever experienced before. You only know that they are dying, and you cannot bear to let them perish alone in the unforgiving darkness. Before we continue, kindly subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The blizzard arrived without warning on the night Brenva turned 20 winters old, stealing the last warmth from the mountain village. She had been gathering firewood near the forest edge when the first violent gust nearly knocked her to the frozen ground. The wind screamed through the ancient pines with such fury that even the strongest trees bent low beneath its terrible force. Snow began falling in thick curtains that turned the entire world into a swirling maze of white and bitter cold. Brenva knew she should return to her small cottage immediately before the storm grew worse and trapped her outside. But something deeper than reason pulled her forward into the woods, a feeling she could not name or understand or deny. Her father had died 3 winters past, leaving her alone to survive in a world that showed little mercy to solitary women. The villagers whispered that she was strange, too willing to wander the forests, too comfortable among the wild creatures and shadows. They did not understand why she preferred the company of ravens and deer to the gossip and judgment of human tongues. Brenva wrapped her worn cloak tighter around her shoulders as the wind tried to tear it away from her shivering body. Her long dark hair whipped across her face, stinging her cheeks with strands that felt like frozen threads of iron. The cold bit through her leather boots and woolen dress, making each step forward an act of stubborn will against nature. She should have turned back, but the pull in her chest grew stronger with every moment, urging her deeper still. Then she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze colder than the winter air that surrounded her completely. It was not the howl of hunting wolves calling to their pack beneath the silver moon hanging somewhere above the storm. This sound carried pain and weakness, a desperate plea from creatures who face death with the same fear any living being knows. Brenva followed the sound through the blinding snow, her hands outstretched to feel her way past trees she could barely see. The wind fought against her every step, as if trying to protect some secret the forest wanted to keep hidden forever. Her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves, and her face felt like stone carved from ice and frozen tears. But she pressed on, driven by something ancient and nameless that lived deep within her very bones and spirit. The cave appeared suddenly before her, a dark mouth carved into the mountainside by water and time beyond human memory. Brenva stumbled inside, grateful for even the small shelter it offered from the relentless assault of wind and snow. She blinked rapidly, trying to force her eyes to adjust to the deeper darkness that filled the stone chamber before her. Then she saw them, 12 wolves lying in a circle, their bodies pressed close together for warmth that was clearly failing. Their fur was thick with ice crystals that sparkled faintly in what little light crept in from the storm outside. Some were large and powerful looking despite their current weakness, while others seemed younger, perhaps born only seasons before this terrible night. Their eyes reflected what dim light existed, turning toward her with a mixture of desperation and something that almost looked like hope. Brenva's heart clenched with a pain sharper than any physical wound she had ever known in all her difficult years. These magnificent creatures were dying, freezing slowly in this cave that should have protected them from the cruel winter beyond. She did not think about danger or fear or the stories mothers told their children about wolves that devoured unwary travelers. All she saw were living beings who needed help, who deserved mercy, who should not die alone in darkness and cold. Brenva turned and rushed back out into the storm, her mind racing through possibilities and plans despite the chaos around her. The village was too far away now, and no one would brave this blizzard to help wolves they considered dangerous enemies. She would have to save them herself, using whatever resources she could gather from the unforgiving wilderness surrounding her on every side. Her cottage stood closer than the village center, perhaps only a short distance if she could find her way through snow. Brenva fought against the wind that seemed determined to push her back, to keep her from completing whatever purpose drove her. Her lungs burned with each breath of air so cold it felt like swallowing shards of broken glass and frozen iron. Finally she reached her small home, bursting through the door and immediately gathering every blanket and fur covering she owned without hesitation. She grabbed the remaining firewood from beside her hearth, along with flint and dried moss for starting flames in wet conditions. There was dried meat hanging from her rafters, food she had saved for the deepest part of winter when hunting became impossible. Brenva took it all without a second thought, loading her arms until she could barely carry the weight of everything. The journey back to the cave seemed to take an eternity as the storm raged with even greater violence than before. She fell twice in the deep snow, scattering her precious supplies, forcing her to search blindly with numb fingers to recover everything. Tears froze on her cheeks, but she refused to give up, refused to let those wolves die when she had the power to help them somehow. When she finally stumbled back into the cave, she dropped everything and immediately began building a fire near the entrance for light and heat. Her hands shook so badly she could barely strike the flint properly, but eventually a spark caught in the dry moss. She fed the tiny flame carefully, nursing it into a proper fire that pushed back the darkness and began filling the cave with warmth. The wolves watched her with eyes that seemed too intelligent, too aware, as if they understood exactly what she was doing for them. Brenva approached them slowly, speaking in soft tones meant to calm any fear they might feel toward a human in their vulnerable state. She began draping the blankets and furs over their trembling bodies, covering each wolf with gentle care and murmured words of comfort. Their fur was wet beneath her touch, and she could feel how their bodies shook with cold that had seeped deep into muscle and bone. One wolf in particular caught her attention, larger than the others, with fur as black as a moonless night and eyes like molten amber. He lay in the center of the circle, surrounded by the others as if they had been trying to share their warmth with him. His gaze met hers, and Brenva felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that had no name or explanation she could understand. She placed her warmest fur directly over him, her fingers lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on his massive head. Then she turned her attention to the fire, building it larger and brighter until the cave filled with warmth and dancing orange light. Brenva began cutting the dried meat into pieces, offering it to each wolf in turn, watching as they ate with desperate hunger. They were so weak that some could barely lift their heads to take the food from her outstretched hands without trembling. She stayed with them through the long night, keeping the fire burning strong, adding wood whenever the flames began to diminish even slightly. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside the cave, life slowly returned to 12 wolves who had been so close to death. As dawn approached and the first gray light began to filter through the still falling snow, Brenva finally allowed herself to rest. She sat with her back against the cave wall, watching the wolves sleep peacefully beneath the blankets and furs she had given them. The black wolf's eyes opened and found hers across the firelit space, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. In that moment, Brenva wondered what force had truly led her into the storm to find these creatures when any sane person would have stayed safe at home. Could it be that some greater purpose was weaving itself around her life, binding her to these wolves in ways she could not yet see or comprehend fully? 3 days passed before the storm finally released its grip on the mountain and allowed the sun to shine once more. Brenva had stayed in the cave the entire time, leaving only briefly to fetch more wood and supplies from her now freezing cottage. The wolves grew stronger with each passing hour, their bodies recovering from the near death they had faced in the cold darkness. She learned to read their moods and needs, understanding when they wanted food or simply needed her quiet presence beside them. The black wolf remained the center of attention among the pack, the one all others seemed to defer to without question. He moved with a grace and power that set him apart, even from the other large males who clearly respected his authority completely. Brenva found herself drawn to him repeatedly, sitting close to his side, running her fingers through his thick midnight fur while he watched her. His amber eyes held depths of intelligence that sometimes frightened her with how human they seemed despite his animal form and nature. On the morning of the 4th day, when sunlight finally streamed into the cave bright and warm, something extraordinary happened without warning. The air around the black wolf began to shimmer like heat rising from summer stones, bending light in ways that defied natural law. Brenva gasped and scrambled backward as his form began to shift and change before her disbelieving eyes and racing heart. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded into skin, and where a massive wolf had been, a man now knelt on the cave floor. He was tall and powerfully built, with the same black hair and burning amber eyes that had captivated her in his wolf shape. His face was strong and handsome in a wild way, marked by scars that spoke of battles fought and survived through strength alone. He was completely bare before her, but he showed no shame or embarrassment, simply rising to his full impressive height with natural dignity. The other wolves began their own transformations, filling the cave with sounds of change that seemed impossible yet undeniably real before her. Soon 12 humans stood where wolves had been, men and women of varying ages, all watching her with expressions ranging from gratitude to curiosity. Brenva could not find her voice, could not make sense of what she had just witnessed with her own eyes in this small cave. The black-haired man stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying command that demanded attention and respect. "I am Valdris, king of the northern wolf tribes, ruler of all shapeshifters who run beneath the moon's silver light," he said clearly. "These are my closest guards and advisors, sworn to protect me with their lives even unto death and beyond if necessary." Brenva finally found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper filled with shock and growing wonder both. "You are wolves who become human or humans who become wolves?" she asked, trying to make her mind accept this impossible truth. "We are both and neither, born to walk in two skins, to serve as bridges between the wild world and the world of men," Valdris explained patiently. He moved closer to her, and Brenva noticed how he moved with the same predatory grace he had shown in his wolf form. "You saved our lives when we were trapped by the storm, weakened by poison that our enemies placed in the water we drank," he continued seriously. "The cold would have finished what the poison began if you had not found us and shown mercy to creatures you had every reason to fear or ignore completely." Brenva shook her head, still struggling to comprehend the reality now standing before her in human form and speaking with human words. "I could not let you die," she said simply, her voice stronger now despite the trembling in her hands and racing of her startled heart. "Any creature deserves kindness when they suffer, regardless of what shape they wear or what nature flows through their blood and bones." Valdris smiled, and the expression transformed his fierce face into something warmer, more approachable, almost gentle despite his obvious power and strength. "That compassion marks you as different from most humans who walk these mountains," a woman said from behind him in melodious tones. She had transformed from one of the smaller wolves, her hair the color of autumn leaves and her eyes sharp as a hunting hawk. "I am Shivara, advisor to the king and keeper of our ancient laws and traditions," she introduced herself with a slight bow of respect. "What you have done creates a debt that must be honored according to the oldest laws that govern our kind and our honor." Brenva felt a flutter of uncertainty in her stomach at those words, wondering what exactly she had gotten herself into by following her heart. "I seek no payment for doing what any decent person should do when faced with suffering," she protested quickly and with genuine confusion. Valdris raised his hand, silencing her gently but firmly with a gesture that showed his natural authority over all situations and people. "Nevertheless, the debt exists and must be acknowledged," he stated in tones that allowed no argument or refusal from anyone present here. "You saved not just any wolves but your king and his inner circle, those who guide and protect all shapeshifters across these lands entire." He paused, his amber eyes studying her face with an intensity that made heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold still lingering. "By our law, you may ask one favor of me, anything within my power to grant, and I am bound by honor to fulfill it completely." Brenva opened her mouth to protest again, to insist that she needed nothing, but Valdris continued before she could speak a single word. "Additionally, you have been exposed to our greatest secret, the truth of our existence that we guard above all other things most precious to us." His expression grew more serious, almost sad as he spoke the next words that would change everything she thought she knew about her future. "You cannot return to your village now, for you carry knowledge that could endanger every shapeshifter if it fell into the wrong hands or hearts." Fear gripped Brenva's heart with icy fingers colder than the worst winter storm that had ever blown across these ancient mountains and valleys. "What are you saying?" she demanded, her voice rising with panic she could no longer control or hide from those watching her closely. "Are you going to kill me for the crime of saving your lives and keeping you from freezing to death in that storm?" Valdris moved so quickly she barely saw him cross the distance between them, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but with undeniable strength and surety. "Never," he said fiercely, his face close to hers, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath away from her lungs completely. "You will come with us to our territory, live among our people, and be protected as one who has earned our deepest gratitude and respect eternal." Brenva stared into those amber eyes, seeing sincerity there, but also seeing that she had no real choice in this matter at all. Her old life had ended the moment she stepped into that storm and followed the pull in her heart to save 12 dying wolves. Now a new life awaited her, one she could never have imagined in all her years of solitary existence in this remote mountain village. But what would it mean to live among shapeshifters, among beings who walked between two worlds, and what role would she play in their strange society and customs? The journey to the shapeshifter territory took 5 days of travel through wilderness that few humans had ever seen with living eyes. Valdris and his guards transformed back into wolves for easier movement through the deep snow that still covered the mountain paths and hidden trails. Brenva rode on Valdris's back, her fingers gripped tightly in his thick black fur, amazed at his strength and tireless pace through difficult terrain. They traveled mostly in silence, though Shivara occasionally shifted to human form to explain landmarks or answer Brenva's nervous questions about their destination ahead. The land grew wilder and more beautiful as they moved deeper into territories unmarked by human settlement or influence of any kind whatsoever. Ancient forests rose on either side of hidden valleys where deer grazed peacefully, showing no fear of the wolves passing through their grazing lands. Brenva saw eagles circling high above peaks that scraped the belly of the sky with their snow-covered summits gleaming brilliantly white in sunlight. She felt as though she had stepped out of the world she knew and into a realm of legend, where magic still lived and breathed. On the 6th morning, they crested a final ridge, and Brenva gasped at the sight that spread before her wondering eyes and racing heart. A vast valley opened up below them, green despite the season, warmed by hot springs that sent steam rising into the cold mountain air. Scattered throughout the valley were dwellings unlike any she had seen before, built partially into hillsides and decorated with carved symbols that seemed ancient beyond measure. Smoke rose from cooking fires and she could see people moving about their daily tasks, some in human form, others as wolves running and playing freely. It was a complete society, a hidden kingdom that existed outside the knowledge of the human world she had always known as her only reality. Valdris stopped at the ridge top, allowing Brenva to slide from his back before he transformed once more into his human shape beside her. "Welcome to Thornval, the heart of the northern shapeshifter territories and home to my people for countless generations past," he said with evident pride ringing through every word. A young man approached quickly, carrying clothing which Valdris accepted and donned with practiced ease, though he seemed unbothered by his earlier nakedness in nature. "Come," he said, offering his hand to Brenva, who took it after only a brief moment of hesitation and nervousness about what lay ahead. "Let me introduce you properly to my people and show you the home that will be yours for as long as you choose to stay here." They descended into the valley together, and Brenva felt dozens of eyes turned toward her with open curiosity and some obvious suspicion from certain quarters. She held her head high despite her fear, refusing to show weakness before these people who could sense such things with their heightened senses and awareness. Valdris led her through the settlement, explaining how his people lived in harmony with the land, taking only what they needed and giving back in equal measure. They honored both their human intelligence and their wolf instincts, he told her, seeing both sides of their nature as sacred gifts to be cherished equally. The dwellings were surprisingly comfortable inside, with furs and woven blankets providing warmth, and carefully tended fires burning in stone hearths built with obvious skill. Valdris brought her to a dwelling set slightly apart from the others, smaller but beautifully positioned with a view of the entire valley spreading below it. "This will be your home," he announced, gesturing for her to enter the space that had clearly been prepared quickly but with thoughtful care nonetheless. Inside, Brenva found everything she might need, including furs for sleeping, cooking utensils, stores of dried food, and even fresh flowers in a clay vessel. "Who lived here before?" she asked quietly, turning to face Valdris, who stood watching her from the doorway with an unreadable expression crossing his handsome features. "No one," he replied, moving deeper into the space, his presence seeming to fill it completely despite the open area and high ceiling above them. "I had it prepared for you during our journey here, sending messengers ahead to ensure you would have proper shelter immediately upon arrival here." Brenva felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected kindness, at the care taken for a stranger who had been forced into this new life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotions she could not fully name or control in this overwhelming moment of change and uncertainty. Valdris stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently catch a tear that escaped and rolled down her pale cheek like a tiny river. "You saved my life," he said softly, his voice dropping to tones meant for her ears alone in this private space they now shared. "Everything I have, everything I am, is yours to command if you should ever choose to claim that debt I mentioned before we departed." His touch lingered on her face, and Brenva felt heat spread through her entire body from that single point of contact between their skin. She saw something in his amber eyes that made her breath catch, a hunger that had nothing to do with food or survival or any simple need. Before she could respond or pull away or make sense of the feelings swirling through her confused heart, a voice called from outside the dwelling urgently. Valdris stepped back immediately, the moment breaking like ice cracking beneath sudden weight, the spell between them shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces around them both. My king, the council requests your immediate presence to discuss matters of great importance that cannot wait, a male voice announced formally from beyond the doorway. Valdris closed his eyes briefly, frustration clear on his face before he composed himself and turned toward the door with practiced royal bearing restored fully. I must attend to my duties, he said to Brenva, his voice formal now, the intimacy of moments before carefully locked away behind his kingly mask. Shivara will come soon to help you settle in and explain our ways, answer any questions you have about life here among us all. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her with eyes that burned with promises of conversations yet to be finished between them later. Then he was gone, leaving Brenva alone in her new home, her heart racing, her mind spinning with confusion about what had almost happened there. She sank onto the sleeping furs, her legs suddenly too weak to support her weight, her hands shaking with more than just cold or fear. What was happening to her, and why did the mere presence of this wolf king affect her so powerfully and completely beyond all reason? The days that followed brought Brenva deeper into the strange and beautiful world of the shapeshifters who had become her unexpected family and protectors. Shivara proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the customs and laws that govern pack life with clarity and occasional dry humor that made Brenva smile. She learned that Valdris had ruled for 10 winters since his father fell in battle defending their territory from rival packs who sought dominance. He was respected and loved by his people, known for his fairness in judgment and his fierce protection of those under his care and authority. But Shivara also hinted at loneliness that shadowed the young king, burdens of leadership that allowed him little time for personal happiness or simple pleasures. He needs a mate, Shivara said one afternoon as they worked together grinding herbs for medicines the pack healers would use throughout the coming seasons. The pack grows restless when their alpha remains unmated for too long, fearing weakness or lack of commitment to future generations and continuity. Brenva felt her cheeks flush at the casual mention of Valdris taking a mate, an image forming in her mind that she quickly pushed away. Surely there are many suitable females among your people who would gladly become queen, she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral despite the strange ache forming. Shivara gave her a knowing look that made Brenva want to hide from those too perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through her. There are several who have made their interest quite clear over the years, Shivara agreed with a slight smile playing at her lips mischievously. But Valdris has refused them all, claiming that he feels no bond, no recognition that would make a true and lasting mating possible for happiness. She paused in her grinding, her expression growing more serious as she met Brenva's curious and slightly anxious gaze directly without flinching away. Among our kind, there is something called a soul bond, a connection that goes beyond simple attraction or political advantage between two people, she explained carefully. When it happens, both parties feel it immediately, a pull that cannot be denied or ignored no matter how much one might try to resist. Brenva's heart began to pound as she remembered that moment in the cave, when Valdris's amber eyes had met hers and something shifted inside her. She had felt it again in her dwelling, when his touch on her face had sent fire racing through her veins like nothing she had experienced. Does it happen often? She asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than desperately eager to understand what was happening to her confused heart and mind. Shivara shook her head slowly, her expression growing distant as if remembering something painful from her own past that still haunted her memory even now. It is rare, precious, and not always convenient or simple, she replied with a bitter edge to her voice that surprised Brenva with its intensity. Sometimes the bond forms between those who cannot be together, whose lives or duties pull them in opposite directions despite their heart's desires and needs. Before Brenva could ask more questions, a commotion outside drew their attention away from the herbs and the serious conversation they had been sharing together. They emerged from Shivara's dwelling to find a group of wolves returning from patrol, their bodies tense with obvious agitation and barely controlled anger. Valdris appeared almost instantly, already transformed and moving with the deadly grace of a predator ready to defend his territory against any threat or danger. The lead wolf shifted to human form, a scarred warrior named Kale who served as one of Valdris's most trusted scouts and fighters in battle. The southern pack has crossed into our territory again, he reported, his voice tight with fury barely restrained by respect for his king's authority and judgment. They killed 2 of our deer and left their scent markings deliberately to provoke a response from us, to challenge your leadership and strength openly. Valdris's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering before a violent tempest, his amber eyes flashing with barely contained rage that made everyone step back instinctively. How many? He asked, his voice deceptively calm despite the tension radiating from every line of his powerful body standing before them all now. At least 15, perhaps more hiding beyond our scouts' range of detection, Kale answered, his hands clenched into fists at his sides in frustration. "They are testing us, my king, seeing if you have grown weak or distracted since returning from your ordeal in the mountains and storms." Brenva felt ice form in her stomach at those words, realizing suddenly that her presence here might be seen as weakness or distraction exactly as described. Valdris seemed to sense her distress, his eyes finding hers across the gathered crowd with an intensity that made everything else fade into unimportance temporarily. "Gather the warriors," he commanded, never breaking eye contact with Brenva as he spoke to his people assembled and waiting for his orders and direction. "We ride at dusk to remind the southern pack why our territory remains ours and why I am still king of the northern tribes entire." The crowd dispersed quickly to prepare, leaving only Valdris and Brenva standing in the growing shadows of late afternoon as the sun began to sink. He crossed to her in swift strides, his hands gripping her arms gently but urgently, his face close enough that she could feel his breath. "I must do this," he said, his voice rough with emotions he clearly struggled to control or contain within his disciplined royal bearing and strength. "But I need you to understand that you are not a weakness or a distraction, you are the opposite of those things entirely and completely." Brenva shook her head, tears threatening to spill as fear for his safety overwhelmed her common sense and self-control both at once together. "Then what am I?" she whispered, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm rapidly and strongly. Valdris stared down at her, conflict raging in his eyes, his jaw clenched as if fighting against words that wanted to escape his lips urgently. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely more than a growl that sent shivers down her spine and made her knees weaken beneath her weight entirely. "You are my soul bond," he admitted, the words seeming torn from somewhere deep inside him, from a place of truth he could no longer deny. "From the moment I saw you in that cave, I felt the recognition that only comes once in a lifetime for my kind always." Brenva gasped, her entire world tilting sideways as this impossible truth crashed over her like a wave pulling her under deep water and currents strong. Before she could respond or process or do anything but stare at him with wide shocked eyes, he released her and stepped back quickly with effort. "I have to go," he said, pain clear in his voice as he turned away from her, already beginning to shift into his wolf form. "But I will return, and when I do, we will finish this conversation that has been building between us since the very beginning of everything." Then he was gone, racing away with his warriors following close behind, leaving Brenva standing alone with her world completely changed and her heart aching. Would Valdris return safely from this confrontation, or had she just heard the last words her soul bond would ever speak to her fragile mortal heart? Night fell over Thornval like a heavy cloak, and Brenva found sleep impossible as worry gnawed at her heart with relentless teeth that would not stop. She paced her dwelling until Shivara arrived, her face drawn with concern that matched what Brenva felt coursing through her entire trembling body and mind. "Come with me," Shivara said gently, offering her hand in friendship and understanding that Brenva desperately needed during this terrible waiting time that stretched endlessly. They climbed to a high point overlooking the valley, where other pack members had gathered to wait for news from the battle that raged somewhere. An elderly woman sat near a fire, her eyes closed, her hands moving in strange patterns as she murmured words in a language Brenva did not know. "She is our seer," Shivara explained quietly, settling beside Brenva on a flat stone still warm from the afternoon sun that had long since vanished. "She can sometimes see through the eyes of our warriors, sense what happens in battles beyond the reach of our normal sight and awareness of things." Brenva watched the old woman with fascination and fear both, wondering what visions played behind those closed and wrinkled eyelids right at this moment. Suddenly the seer gasped, her eyes flying open wide with shock and horror that made everyone lean forward with desperate concern and growing dread together. "Blood," she whispered, her voice cracking with age and with the weight of what she witnessed in her mind's mysterious eye that saw beyond distance. "So much blood spilling on sacred ground, staining the earth with the price of pride and territory and ancient rivalries that never die or fade." Brenva felt her heart stop, her hands gripping Shivara's arms so tightly that the other woman winced but did not pull away from her painful grasp. "Is Valdris alive?" she demanded, unable to keep the desperate fear from her voice despite knowing how it revealed her feelings to everyone who listened closely. The seer's milky eyes found her unerringly despite their apparent blindness, fixing on Brenva with an intensity that burned through her very soul and being. "The king fights like 10 warriors combined, but he is surrounded by enemies who seek to destroy him and claim his throne for their own desires," she said. "They have planned this carefully, using the border dispute as bait to draw him away from the safety of his pack and loyal warriors who protect him." Horror washed over Brenva as she understood the terrible truth, This had been a trap designed specifically to kill Valdris when he was most vulnerable always. Without thinking, without planning, driven only by instinct and the soul bond that now tied her to the Wolf King completely, she stood and began running. "Brenva, wait," Shivara called after her, but she did not stop or slow down or listen to reason or common sense or any voice of caution. She ran to the stable area where the pack kept supplies and equipment, grabbing a thick cloak and sturdy boots that would protect her somewhat. Brenva had no weapons except a small knife meant for cutting herbs, but she took it anyway, knowing it would be useless against shapeshifter warriors but needing something. She ran from the valley, following the path she had seen the warriors take hours before when they departed for battle under darkening skies above. The forest closed around her quickly, dark and full of sounds that would have terrified her only weeks ago but now seemed unimportant compared to reaching Valdris. Her human senses were weak compared to shapeshifter abilities, but the bond between them pulled her forward like an invisible cord tied to her very heart. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed with exhaustion, until she tasted blood in her mouth from breathing the cold night air. Then she heard it, the sounds of battle ahead, snarls and yelps of pain, the terrible sounds of teeth and claws tearing through flesh and bone. Brenva burst into a clearing and froze at the carnage spread before her horrified eyes, unable to process the violence and blood that covered everything she saw. Wolves fought in a tangled mass of bodies, impossible to tell friend from enemy in the chaos of violence and desperate survival instincts unleashed fully. Then she saw him, Valdris, in his magnificent black wolf form, surrounded by 5 enemies who circled him with deadly intent and coordinated movements clearly practiced. Blood matted his fur, and he moved with a slight limp that told Brenva he was injured despite the fierce determination in every movement he made. Without thinking about consequences or her own safety or anything beyond saving her soul bond from death, Brenva screamed with everything she had contained inside. The sound cut through the battle like a blade, shocking everyone into momentary stillness as every head turned toward her standing at the clearing's edge alone. Valdris's amber eyes found hers, and she saw horror mixed with desperate love in their glowing depths as he realized she had come into danger. The moment of distraction cost him. One of the circling wolves lunged forward, jaws aimed at Valdris's exposed throat for a killing blow without mercy. Brenva moved faster than she ever had in her entire life, throwing herself forward, her knife raised though she knew it would do little good. She crashed into the attacking wolf just as its jaws were closing, her blade sinking into its shoulder rather than anything vital or stopping its momentum. The wolf yelped and turned on her with fury, and Brenva knew she was about to die beneath claws and teeth that would tear her apart. But Valdris was there suddenly, throwing himself between them, his jaws closing around the other wolf's neck with crushing force that ended the threat immediately and permanently. The remaining enemies saw their chance slipping away as Valdris's warriors rallied and began pushing them back with renewed strength and savage determination to protect their king. Within moments the southern pack was fleeing, leaving their dead behind, their attempted assassination having failed despite their careful planning and superior numbers brought against them. Valdris shifted to human form and caught Brenva as her legs finally gave out, lowering them both to the blood-soaked ground beneath them gently. "You foolish, brave, impossible woman," he said, his voice breaking as he held her against his chest, his hands checking her frantically for wounds and injuries. "You could have died, should have died for that reckless act of courage beyond all reason or sense or anything resembling careful thought at all." Brenva laughed weakly, tears streaming down her face as relief and delayed fear and love all crashed through her at once, overwhelming her completely and utterly. "You are my soul bond," she said simply, repeating the words he had spoken to her before he left for this terrible battle and trap. "Did you truly think I could stay safely away while you faced death alone without me there beside you no matter the cost or consequences?" Valdris stared down at her, his amber eyes wet with tears he did not bother to hide from her or from his warriors who watched respectfully. Then he kissed her with desperate passion and tenderness combined, claiming her mouth with his in front of everyone as a declaration that could not be denied. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and shaking with emotions too powerful to contain inside their bodies and hearts any longer at all. "You saved me again," he whispered against her forehead, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe but did not care at all about that discomfort. "Once in a cave from freezing death, and now on a battlefield from enemies who sought to end my reign and take everything I protect and love." Brenva pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her hands framing his blood-stained face with gentleness that contrasted with the violence surrounding them. "I will always save you," she promised fiercely, meaning every word with her entire being and soul completely and without any doubt whatsoever in her heart. Just as you saved me from a life of loneliness and gave me a purpose and a home and a love I never imagined could exist." Valdris smiled through his tears, and in that moment Brenva knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as one being and one heart united. But as they stood and began the journey home with the warriors forming a protective circle around them both, Brenva could not help but wonder what consequences would follow. Would the Southern Pack accept this defeat, or would their assassination attempt be only the first battle in a much longer and deadlier war yet to come? The attack on Valdris brought all the Northern Packs together in a great gathering held under the full moon 3 nights after the battle ended. Alpha wolves came from distant territories, their warriors and families filling Thornval beyond anything Brenva had seen since her arrival in this hidden world of magic. She stood beside Valdris in the great circle where pack law dictated all important decisions must be made with witnesses from every family and clan. He had not left her side since the battle, keeping her close with a possessiveness that his people seemed to understand and accept without question or complaint. Shivara had explained that by defending Valdris in battle, Brenva had earned warrior status among the packs despite being fully human without shifting abilities at all. More importantly, she had publicly demonstrated the soul bond between herself and their king, a bond that pack law held sacred above all other relationships or considerations. Now the Council of Alphas would decide the future, would determine what should be done about the Southern Pack's aggression and betrayal of territorial agreements long held. Valdris stood tall and proud despite the bandages that wrapped his ribs and the lingering limp that reminded everyone how close they had come to losing him. "The Southern Pack violated our borders deliberately," he announced, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with natural authority and power that commanded attention from everyone listening. "They sought not just territory but my life, believing that without me, the Northern Packs would fall into chaos and be easily conquered or scattered." Murmurs of anger rippled through the gathering, the insult to their king cutting deep into the pride of every shapeshifter present in this sacred place. An older alpha stepped forward, his gray-shot hair marking him as one who had survived many battles and many winters of hardship and struggle. "What would you have us do, King Valdris?" he asked, his voice respectful but demanding clear action and leadership in this crisis they all faced together. Valdris was silent for a long moment, his hand finding Brenva's and gripping it tightly as if drawing strength from her presence beside him always. "War would satisfy our honor and our anger," he said finally, his words measured and careful despite the fury everyone knew burned inside his warrior heart. "But war would also cost us many lives, would leave many mates widowed and many children without parents to guide them into the future ahead." He paused, looking around the circle at faces young and old, at warriors eager for revenge and elders worried about the cost of violence. "Instead, I propose we extend an offer of peace to the Southern Pack, but with conditions that will ensure this violation never happens again ever," he continued. "They will cede the disputed border lands to our control, will pay tribute of food and resources for 5 winters to compensate us for damages done. And their alpha will submit to me publicly, acknowledging my authority over the northern territories before all packs as witnesses to this binding agreement forever." The proposal caused immediate discussion among the gathered alphas, some nodding agreement while others looked uncertain about showing mercy to those who had tried assassination and murder. The gray-haired alpha spoke again, his eyes shrewd as he studied Valdris with an expression that seemed to measure more than just this decision alone. "And what of your mate?" he asked, gesturing toward Brenva with a gnarled hand marked by scars from countless battles fought and survived through strength alone. "She is human, unable to shift, unable to bear wolf pups that would continue your bloodline and ensure the throne passes to legitimate heirs properly." Brenva felt her heart sink, realizing that she had been so focused on the bond between herself and Valdris that she had not considered this. But Valdris's grip on her hand tightened, and when he spoke his voice rang with absolute certainty that allowed no doubt or questioning from anyone present. "Brenva is my soul bond, chosen for me by forces beyond our understanding or control, by the same ancient magic that gave us our ability to walk in 2 shapes, he declared. "Pack law is clear on this matter. The soul bond supersedes all other considerations including bloodline or ability to shift between forms at will." He pulled Brenva forward, positioning her directly beside him so that everyone could see them standing together as equals despite their different natures and origins entirely. "She saved 12 wolves from freezing death without knowing what we were, showing compassion when most humans would have shown only fear or hatred instead," he reminded them. "She then risked her own life to save mine in battle, proving her courage and her commitment to me and to all of us beyond any doubt." Valdris released her hand only to drape his arm around her shoulders, claiming her before everyone with a gesture of possession and pride and deep love combined. I will take Brenva as my queen and mate before the next full moon rises over our valley below, he announced, his voice brooking no argument from anyone. Any who object may challenge me directly, but know that I will defend my right to choose my own mate with every ounce of strength I possess within me. Silence fell over the gathering as the challenge hung in the air, a test of authority that every alpha present understood on a deep instinctual level completely. One by one the alphas began to kneel, acknowledging Valdris's right as king to make this choice regardless of their personal feelings or concerns about bloodlines continuing. The gray-haired alpha was the last to kneel, but when he did, his weathered face bore a slight smile of approval and respect both. Then let it be known throughout all the packs that Valdris, king of the Northern Territories, has chosen his queen and mate, he said formally and with clear voice. May their bond be strong, their hearts united, and their rule bring prosperity and peace to all who shelter under their protection and care always. Cheers erupted from the gathered shapeshifters, the sound rising into the night sky where the moon watched over them with her ancient silver eyes shining brightly. Brenva felt tears of joy streaming down her face as Valdris turned her to face him, his amber eyes glowing with love so fierce it took her breath. "Are you certain?" she whispered, needing to hear him say it one more time, needing to know that he chose this freely despite any costs or consequences. "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life," he replied, his voice soft enough for only her to hear above the celebrating crowd surrounding them. "You are my soul bond, my salvation, my heart walking outside my body in the form of the bravest woman I have ever known or will know." He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promises for the future they would build together despite the differences that separated their origins and natures. When they finally parted, Brenva looked around at the celebrating shapeshifters, at Shivara who smiled with genuine happiness, at the faces of those who had accepted her. She thought back to that stormy night when she had followed an inexplicable pull into a cave where 12 dying wolves waited for a miracle to save them. She had given them mercy without expecting anything in return, had simply followed her heart because it was the right thing to do for creatures who suffered. Now here she stood, about to become queen of a people she had not known existed, bonded to a king who was both man and wolf combined. Her old life was gone forever, buried under snow and time and distance she could never cross again even if she wanted to return to what was. But this new life offered love and purpose and belonging she had never found in that lonely cottage on the mountain among humans who never understood her. Brenva smiled up at Valdris, her heart full to bursting with happiness despite the challenges that surely lay ahead for them both to face and overcome. She had saved 12 wolves from freezing to death in a storm, never knowing that one among them wore an invisible crown of authority and power. Now that King would place a real crown upon her head, would make her his queen before all the packs, would bind his life to hers forever. And as the celebration continued around them under the watchful moon above, Brenva knew that she would do it all again without hesitation or doubt at all. For some destinies are written in starlight and storm winds, woven by forces beyond mortal understanding or control, and meant to be followed wherever they might lead your willing heart. 5 winters passed since the night Brenva became queen of the northern shapeshifter territories beneath a moon that blessed their union with silver light. The great hall of Thornval had been transformed for the mating ceremony, decorated with winter flowers that bloomed only in the enchanted valley's warmth despite the snow outside. Brenva had worn a gown woven from the finest materials the packs could provide, dyed the deep blue of twilight and embroidered with silver threads that caught firelight. Valdris had stood before her in human form, his black hair braided with leather cords and small bones that marked him as warrior and king both combined. The ceremony itself had been beautiful and ancient, filled with rituals that dated back to the very first shapeshifters who walked these lands in ages long past. They had drunk from a shared cup mixed with honey and herbs that symbolized the sweetness and healing they would bring to each other's lives through the years. They had exchanged vows not written by others but spoken from their hearts, promises that made even the hardest warriors weep with the emotion carried in every word. And when Valdris had placed the crown upon her head, a circlet of silver shaped like wolves running in an eternal circle, Brenva had felt the weight of responsibility. But she had also felt the love and acceptance from the people who had once been strangers but now were family in the truest sense of that word. The Southern Pack had accepted Valdris's terms of peace after their alpha was challenged and defeated by one of his own warriors who saw the wisdom in submission. The new Southern Alpha had knelt before Valdris in the Great Gathering, acknowledging his authority before every pack as witnesses to the binding agreement made that day. The disputed borderlands were ceded peacefully, and the tribute had been paid faithfully every season since that momentous decision was made and honored by all parties. More importantly, Alliances had formed between packs that had once viewed each other with suspicion and distrust born of generations of minor conflicts and old grievances. Valdris had proven himself not just a warrior king but a wise ruler who preferred peace when possible while maintaining the strength to enforce it when necessary. And Brenva had surprised everyone, including herself, with how naturally she took to the role of queen despite her human origins and initial unfamiliarity with shapeshifter ways. Shivara had been her constant guide and had become the closest friend Brenva had ever known in all her years of solitary existence before finding this life. Together they had established a healing center where both shapeshifters and the few trusted humans who knew of their existence could come for treatment and care when injured or sick. Brenva's knowledge of herbs and medicines from her human upbringing combined perfectly with shapeshifter healing techniques to create something entirely new and remarkably effective for treating all manner of ailments. She had also become an advocate for the orphaned and the weak within pack society, ensuring that those without family were cared for properly and given opportunities to thrive. Her compassion, the same quality that had led her to save 12 dying wolves in a storm, now shaped policies that made Thornval a place of justice and mercy. The other packs had taken notice, and gradually Brenva's influence had spread beyond just the northern territories to touch shapeshifter communities across the entire vast region they inhabited. Young females, both shapeshifter and the rare humans brought into their world through various circumstances, looked to her as proof that strength came in many different forms beyond physical power. But the one shadow that fell across their otherwise happy life together was the matter of children and heirs to continue Valdris's bloodline into future generations yet to come. 3 winters had passed since their mating with no sign of pregnancy, and Brenva felt the weight of that failure growing heavier with each passing season and moon cycle. She knew the pack elders whispered concerns about succession, about what would happen to the throne if Valdris died without an heir to inherit his authority and power. Valdris himself never spoke of disappointment, never made her feel less than cherished and loved completely regardless of whether she could bear him children or not at all. But Brenva saw the sadness in his eyes sometimes when he watched pack children playing, saw the longing he tried so hard to hide from her observant gaze. She had consulted with healers and wise women, had tried every remedy and ritual they suggested, had prayed to whatever gods might listen to a human woman's desperate pleas. Nothing had worked, and slowly Brenva had begun to accept that perhaps the soul bond between human and shapeshifter came with a price neither of them had anticipated paying. On the morning of the 5th anniversary of their mating ceremony, Brenva woke feeling strange, a peculiar sensation in her belly that she could not quite identify or name properly. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake Valdris who slept peacefully beside her, his arm draped possessively across her waist even in deepest sleep as always. But as soon as she stood, a wave of dizziness washed over her so powerfully that she had to grip the bed frame to keep from falling. Valdris woke instantly, his warrior instincts alert even before his eyes fully opened, his hands reaching for her to steady her swaying form immediately and with concern clear. "What is wrong?" he demanded, already checking her for signs of illness or injury with hands that shook slightly despite his attempts at remaining calm and controlled. Brenva shook her head, waiting for the dizziness to pass before attempting to speak words that would make sense to either of them in this confusing moment. "I do not know," she admitted honestly, sinking back onto the bed as another wave of nausea joined the dizziness in making her feel utterly miserable and weak. Valdris called for Shivara immediately, and within moments the healer arrived with her kit of medicines and herbs carried everywhere she went for just such emergencies as this. She examined Brenva thoroughly, asking questions about symptoms and sensations while Valdris paced the room like a caged wolf desperate to protect his mate from invisible threats he could not fight. Then Shivara went very still, her hands resting gently on Brenva's abdomen, her eyes closing as if listening for something only she could hear with senses beyond normal human ability. When she opened her eyes again, tears streamed down her face freely, and her smile was so bright it seemed to light the entire room with its pure joy. "You are with child," she whispered, the words falling into the silence like stones dropped into a still pond, creating ripples that would spread outward forever and change everything. Brenva stared at her in shock, unable to process what she had just heard, her mind refusing to accept something she had almost given up hoping for entirely. "That is impossible," she breathed, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly where Shivara's hands still rested gently and with obvious reverence for what lay within her body now. Shivara laughed through her tears, shaking her head at Brenva's denial of the truth that the healer could sense with absolute certainty and confidence in her abilities and knowledge. "Nothing is impossible when it comes to soul bonds," she said, her voice rich with emotion and happiness for her friend and queen who had suffered silently for so long. "The magic that binds you and Valdris together has created something new, something that has never existed before in all the history of our people throughout generations past. Valdres had stopped pacing and now stood frozen, staring at Brenva with an expression of such overwhelming joy and disbelief that it made her heart ache with love for him. "A child," he said, testing the words as if afraid they might dissolve into nothing if spoken too loudly or with too much hope attached to them. Brenva nodded, her own tears starting to flow as the reality finally began to sink into her mind and heart and soul all at once together completely. Valdres crossed the room in 2 long strides and dropped to his knees before her, his hands covering hers and Shivara's on her belly where their child grew safely within her. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion too powerful to contain inside his chest or heart any longer despite his usual royal composure and control always maintained. "Thank you for never giving up hope, for bearing the weight of the pack's expectations and disappointment, for loving me enough to endure that pain and loneliness without complaint or bitterness." Brenva pulled him up to sit beside her, holding his face between her hands and kissing him with all the love and gratitude and relief that flooded through her. When they finally separated, Shivara had discreetly left them alone to share this moment in privacy that such momentous news deserved between mates and partners in life. "What if the child cannot shift?" Brenva asked quietly, voicing the fear that had already begun to creep into her happiness like shadows at the edges of bright light. "What if my human blood weakens the shapeshifter magic? What if the pack rejects an heir who is only partially one of them and not fully accepted by either world completely?" Valdres silenced her worries with another kiss, fierce and claiming and full of absolute certainty that left no room for doubt or fear to take root and grow. "Then they will reject their king as well," he said simply, his amber eyes burning with determination and love combined in equal measure and strength together always united. "For I will not allow anyone to harm or diminish our child regardless of what abilities they do or do not possess when they enter this world breathing and alive. We will love them completely and raise them to be strong and kind and wise regardless of whether they can shift between forms or not at all." Brenva leaned against his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear, feeling more complete than she ever had in all her life before this moment. The months that followed were filled with both joy and anxiety as Brenva's body changed and grew with the life developing inside her womb steadily and surely. The pack's reaction to the news of their coming heir had been mixed, with some celebrating while others whispered concerns about the child's potential lack of shifting ability. But Valdres made it clear through both word and action that anyone who spoke against his child or his mate would answer to him personally and face his wrath unleashed. Gradually even the most skeptical pack members came to accept the pregnancy as a blessing, a sign that the bond between their king and his human queen was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Brenva felt the child move within her for the first time on a cold winter evening while she sat with Valdres watching the sunset paint the valley in colors of gold and crimson. She gasped and grabbed his hand, placing it on her belly so he could feel the fluttering movements of their child exploring the boundaries of their small world inside her body. Valdres's face transformed with wonder and awe, tears streaming down his cheeks as he felt his child move and respond to the pressure of his large hand against Brenva's swollen stomach. "They are strong," he whispered, his voice filled with pride and love and protective fierce determination to keep both mother and child safe from any harm or danger forever. "Like their mother who saved me twice, who became a queen despite being human, who loved me even when it meant leaving behind everything she had ever known before." The labor began on a night when snow fell thick and heavy, reminding Brenva of that storm 5 winters past when everything had changed with her decision to save dying wolves. Shivara and the pack's most experienced midwives attended her through the long hours of pain and effort and pushing that seemed to go on endlessly without relief or mercy. Valdres stayed by her side despite tradition that dictated males should wait elsewhere during the birthing process, holding her hand and refusing to leave her even for a moment of time. Just before dawn broke over the valley, when Brenva thought she could endure no more pain, a strong cry split the air and filled the room with new life and hope. Shivara wrapped the infant carefully in soft furs and placed the baby in Brenva's arms with a smile that seemed to contain all the joy in the world entire. "A daughter," she announced, her voice thick with emotion as she watched Valdres lean over to see his child for the first time with his own amber eyes wide with wonder. The baby was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that seemed to shift between amber and the deep brown of Brenva's own human coloring as they fluttered open. Tiny fingers gripped Valdres's thumb with surprising strength for one so newly born into this world of magic and mystery and love surrounding her completely on all sides protectively. "She is beautiful," Valdres breathed, reaching out with his free hand to gently stroke his daughter's soft cheek with a touch infinitely gentle despite his warrior calluses and scars. Brenva nodded, unable to speak past the lump of emotion lodged firmly in her throat as she looked down at the miracle they had created together against all odds. "What shall we name her?" she asked when she finally found her voice again, looking up at Valdres with eyes that asked for his input and decision in this important matter. Valdres was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on his daughter's face as if memorizing every detail of her features to carry in his heart forever. "Ravenna," he said finally, the name carrying weight and meaning in the old tongue that Brenva had learned meant something like storm's gift or blessing born of winter fury. It was perfect, acknowledging the storm that had brought them together and the new life that had come from that fateful night of snow and wind and dying wolves saved. Brenva smiled and nodded her agreement, pressing a kiss to Ravenna's forehead while Valdres draped his arm around both of them protectively and with obvious pride and love. The question of whether Ravenna would be able to shift remained unanswered for the first 2 winters of her life as she grew strong and healthy and bright with curiosity. She learned to walk early, toddling around on surprisingly steady legs, and she learned to speak in both the common tongue and the shapeshifter language with equal facility and speed. The pack adored her, this child of 2 worlds who carried both human compassion and wolf loyalty in her small but fierce and determined heart and spirit always present. Then on the morning of her second winter celebration, something extraordinary happened that would become legend among the shapeshifter packs for generations to come after this remarkable day. Ravenna was playing in the snow outside the Great Hall, watched over by guards who would die before allowing harm to come to their princess and future queen. Suddenly her form began to shimmer just as Brenva had seen the wolves shimmer that first morning in the cave when everything had changed forever and completely. But instead of transforming into a full wolf as pure shapeshifters did with ease and natural ability, Ravenna became something different entirely and wholly new to all who witnessed it. Her shift was partial, her face taking on wolf features while her body remained mostly human in shape, creating a form that blended both natures perfectly and beautifully together as one. She could speak in this form, could use human hands and intelligence while also accessing the strength and senses of her wolf heritage fully and without limitation or weakness. When Valdres and Brenva arrived, summoned urgently by the guards, they found their daughter playing happily in her new mixed form, completely unafraid of the change that had occurred naturally. Shivara examined Ravenna thoroughly and declared that this was not a weakness but a new evolution, a bridge between species that had never existed before in any known history. The pack's reaction was initially one of confusion and uncertainty about what this meant for their traditions and understanding of what it meant to be shapeshifter in nature and blood. But as time passed and Ravenna learned to control her unique abilities, shifting between full human, full wolf, and her special mixed form at will, acceptance grew among them all. Other children began to be born from matings between shapeshifters and the few trusted humans who had been brought into their world through various circumstances and bonds of love. Each child was different, some able to shift fully like pure shapeshifters, some like Ravenna with her unique mixed form, and some who remained fully human but carried wolf senses. Brenva watched her daughter grow into a remarkable young woman who would someday rule the packs with wisdom drawn from both her human and wolf heritage combined perfectly together. She thought often of that night in the storm, of the choice she had made to save 12 dying wolves without knowing what consequences would follow from that act. That single decision made in compassion and without expectation of reward had changed not just her life but the entire future of the shapeshifter people forever and always. New alliances formed between humans and shapeshifters in the territories where Valdres's influence reached, based on mutual respect and understanding rather than fear and ignorance separating the two peoples completely. Trade agreements brought prosperity to both communities, and carefully chosen humans were allowed to visit Thornval under strict conditions to learn about the shapeshifters and their ways of living with nature. Brenva became known far beyond the northern territories as the human queen who had proven that love could transcend the boundaries of species and nature and tradition alike. Her story was told around fires in both human villages and shapeshifter dens, inspiring others to look beyond surface differences to the hearts that beat beneath all the various external forms. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful storm, Brenva stood with Valdres on the ridge overlooking Thornval, watching Ravenna play with other pack children in the valley far below them. "Do you ever regret it?" Valdres asked quietly, his arm around her waist as they stood together in comfortable silence watching their world spread out before their pleased eyes. "Regret what?" Brenva asked, though she knew exactly what he meant by the question he had asked of her in this peaceful moment they shared together alone. "Saving those wolves in the cave, leaving your human life behind, becoming queen to a people you did not know existed before that night of storm and snow and freezing cold." Brenva turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to frame his beloved face with the same gentleness she had shown that first time in her dwelling. "I regret nothing," she said firmly, her voice carrying absolute conviction that could not be doubted or questioned by anyone who heard the truth ringing in every word she spoke. "I would make the same choice 1,000 times over if it meant finding you, finding this life, finding a purpose greater than I ever dreamed possible in those lonely years before." Valdres pulled her close, holding her against his chest the way he had done countless times over the years they had shared together as mates and partners and friends. "You saved more than 12 wolves that night," he said, his voice rough with emotion that still overwhelmed him even after all this time spent together loving her completely always. "You saved me from a future without love, saved our people from continuing down a path of isolation and fear, saved countless lives that have been changed by what you started." Brenva smiled against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent that still made her heart race even after 10 winters of waking beside him every single morning. Below them in the valley, Ravenna's laugh rang out clear and joyful, a sound that represented hope for the future and proof that different worlds could unite successfully and create something beautiful. The snow began to fall gently, soft flakes drifting down from gray skies above, covering the valley in a blanket of white that reminded them both of beginnings and storms past. But this snow was peaceful, not the violent blizzard that had brought them together through fate and choice and the mysterious workings of soul bonds beyond mortal understanding or control. Brenva had walked into a storm 5 winters past and found 12 dying wolves who needed her compassion and mercy to survive the terrible cold that threatened to claim their lives. She had not known that one among them was a king, had not known that her kindness would bind her soul to his for all eternity and beyond. She had simply acted from her heart, following instinct and the pull of something greater than herself toward a destiny she could never have imagined or predicted beforehand. And in doing so, she had found everything she never knew she needed and had been searching for without knowing during all those years of loneliness and isolation from others. Love, purpose, family, belonging, and a legacy that would extend far beyond her own mortal life into generations yet unborn who would carry her story forward with pride and remembrance. As they stood together watching the snow fall over their kingdom, Brenva knew that she would continue to be grateful every single day for that storm and what it had brought. For sometimes the fiercest storms bring the greatest blessings, and sometimes saving one life means saving an entire world from darkness and bringing light where none existed before at all. Valdres kissed the top of her head, and together they turned to walk back down to the valley where their daughter and their people waited for them below. The future stretched ahead uncertain and full of challenges that would test them in ways they could not yet foresee or prepare for adequately in all ways possible. But they would face those challenges together, bonded by love stronger than any force in nature, united by a soul connection that death itself could not sever or diminish ever. And when the stories were told in future generations about the human queen who had changed the shapeshifter world, they would remember not just her courage or her compassion alone. They would remember that she had seen dying wolves in a cave and had chosen mercy over fear, had chosen to act rather than walk away safely from trouble. They would remember that from that single choice, a new world had been born where humans and shapeshifters could live in peace and understanding and mutual respect for differences. And they would remember that true love knows no boundaries of form or species, that the heart sees beyond what the eyes perceive to the soul that dwells within. Brenva had saved 12 wolves from freezing to death in a storm, not knowing that one of them was the Alpha King who would become her mate and her destiny. But perhaps on some level deeper than conscious thought, her soul had recognized his even then, had known that her life was about to change in ways both terrifying and wonderful. Perhaps the storm had not been random chance at all but rather the hand of fate pushing them together, writing their story in wind and snow and cold. Or perhaps it was simply the right person in the right place at the right time, making the right choice for the right reasons without thought of reward or consequence. Whatever the truth might be, Brenva knew that she would spend the rest of her days grateful for that night when everything changed and her real life finally began. As the snow continued to fall softly around them and Ravenna's laughter echoed up from the valley below, Brenva smiled and took her mate's hand, ready to face whatever came next. For she had learned that the greatest adventures often begin with a single step into a storm, and the greatest loves often start with a simple act of kindness. If you were given the chance to save someone's life but knew it would completely transform your entire world forever, would you still step forward into the unknown and embrace whatever destiny awaited you beyond the safety of what you know?